cost of this lens, well, it's practically free. 10 to 20 pounds, as I say, if that, and you can often find them for less. A great little lens, don't miss it. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode. Some vintage lenses have increased in price recently, but there are many affordable ones still out there. Today I'm going to have a look at 9 vintage lenses that I've bought recently for as little as £10. If you've got a mirrorless camera, you should try one of these lenses, because even a humble vintage lens will give your images some real character that a modern lens just can't. And just because these are bargains, they're not bargain basement. These are high quality optics that were cheap in their day, and they're still cheap to buy now, and that is to our advantage. So we're going to look today at the Meyer Optik Lydith f3.5 30mm that I recently bought for £30. We're going to look at the Miranda 70 to 210, that's over here somewhere. Here it is, 70 to 210 f4.5 to 5.6. I bought that recently in as new condition for £10. We're going to look at the Minolta MD 50mm f2. I bought that recently for £35 with this lovely little Minolta XG1 SLR. Now, I reckon those are pretty good prices, but what's been your best vintage lens buy? I'd really like to know what's out there and what you've found, so let me know in the comments box below. So let's have a look at today's lenses, and we'll start with this one. This is the Meyer Optik Lydith 30mm f3.5, and this is a very cheap little lens. I paid £30 for it, as I say. I bought an exact amount version because exact amount versions tend to be cheaper, and it really doesn't matter if you're mounting the lens on a digital camera. It doesn't matter what mounts on the back, as long as you can get an adapter to mount it onto your camera. It's a rather unassuming little thing. It's really not a very fancy looking lens at all, and it's not much on paper either. It's an f3.5, so it's not the fastest lens. It gives an equivalent focal length on APS-C of 40mm, and it gives an equivalent of 60mm on micro four thirds. But all images that you're going to see today were shot on full frame. For a cheap lens, this one has quite a bit of hype around it. It seems to be a very popular little optic, so I thought I'd try it out. Before we get to the images though, let's have a look at the lens itself. So there's our little Meyer Optik lens. It's a nice little thing. It's very well constructed. It's all made of metal in the old school way. This one has a bit of a zebra type finish on its body. That's because the aperture and focus rings, the grips, are cut from the metal, so each of those little black marks is a little channel, and that gives you a good grip on the controls. It does look rather futuristic and technical for that, I think, and it must have looked very cool in its day, and it has a very mechanical feel, I think, because of that as well. The focus ring is at the back and the aperture ring is at the front. It's a stepless aperture, so this lens would probably be handy for video shooters too. And this lens is very much a product of the mechanical age, of the age of mechanism. One problem I did encounter using this lens is that these rings are actually quite close together, and it's rather difficult to find them with the camera to your eye and to distinguish between them. But I guess that's a small problem, really. More important is how the lens shoots. What's its image quality like? Well, I found it needs a certain approach to get the best from it, and when you take that approach, it's really quite something. Wide open, it's got very nice blur. It's a slow on wide lens, so it's not a natural blur monster, but blur is still there when you want it. It's very smooth across the distance range. The quality of the blur is very smooth. It's nice and soft up close and at longer distances too. Colours are very nice, but they're a little muted. Personally, I like more vibrant colours, so I maybe tweak them a little bit in post or whack up the saturation in camera a little bit. In terms of sharpness, it is a little bit soft, wide open, and maybe it's a little bit too soft, wide open. But stop it down and oh my goodness, stopped down, this thing is super sharp. It becomes very easy to zone focus, and it almost turns your camera into a point and shoot. And that's how I used it for much of the time. And using it like that turns it into a great street lens. And I think that is this lens's main area of strength, or at least one of them. And its minimum focus distance of 33 centimeters makes it really versatile as well. In the East German tradition of lenses, this lens goes very close and has a very close minimum focus distance, and I really appreciate that in a lens. All in all, this is a great fun little lens, and you can make it yours for around £30 to £40. Really quite a bargain. Okay, so our next lens is this one. This is the Miranda 70 to 210mm f4.5 to f5.6. There were many cheap lenses like this available in the 70s and 80s, and they were sold to the consumer market, to people who wanted a high quality image at a reasonable cost. Many of those lenses were third-party lenses from manufacturers like Tamron, Vivitar, and this company Miranda. Now this was a really lucky find. I bought it for £10 in a charity shop, or if you're in the US, I guess that would be the equivalent of a thrift store. It came with a box, look, in as new condition. Here's the box, look, shiny, colourful box, a little bit worn, but still a box nonetheless. That's made it through the years. Now sometimes vintage lenses, especially the cheaper ones like this one, they get a little bit neglected over the years and unloved, and they can sometimes end up in poor condition. So this is a rare chance to find out how an as new, cheap, third-party lens would have performed straight out of the store if you'd bought it in the 1980s. Let's have a look at this quite surprising optic. So there's our Miranda lens, and the first thing that strikes you about this is its condition. It really is in quite surprisingly good condition. It's still got its past sticker on there, which a lot of these cheaper lenses don't have. There are no marks to any of the markings on the body. There are no scratches or little nicks anywhere. Even the lettering of the name is still in perfect order there. So that's really quite amazing to see. Now this is a fairly slow lens at f4.5 to 5.6, but it is a long lens, so there is plenty of blur available if you want it. Everything works nicely on this lens. The focus ring, this great big focus ring here, is beautifully smooth, just as it was when it was new. The aperture ring is slightly clanky, but then this is a fairly cheap lens, so we'll give it a pass. It turns nicely and cleanly and smoothly, and it works fine. The push-pull mechanism for zooming does have a little wear, so if you hold your camera downwards, it just kind of slides downwards, but that is, I reckon, a small price to pay. Now this will give you a focal length of course 70 to 210mm on a full frame camera. It will give you about an equivalent focal length of 83 to 300 on APS-C, and it will give you a 35mm full frame equivalent of 140 to 420mm on micro four thirds. But all of today's images were shot on full frame. And what surprisingly good images they are. They're clean and clear and delicate and really quite beautiful. I really hadn't expected this quality of image from a cheap lens of this kind. I expected many more flaws than I actually encountered. These images are very sharp even from wide open. Perhaps that's not surprising because it's a fairly small aperture, but nevertheless it makes extremely sharp images from wide open. And I just hadn't expected that from an old third-party lens, no matter how clean it was. The images are absolutely lovely. They've got a lovely feel to them. They've got a clarity and a delicacy which seem to me not unlike the delicacy and the pastel-y tones you get from some Pentax lenses. It's a slow lens for sure, but it's very long, so there is plenty of blur available. Remember, there are three things that affect the amount of blur you get. The distance from the subject, so the nearer you are, the more blur you get. The aperture, the wider your aperture, the more blur you will get. And the focal length, the longer your focal length, the more blur that lens will make. So although it's slow, it's long, so lots of blur is possible. It's got a very lovely quality. It's soft all the way. I couldn't provoke this lens into making rough blur at any point throughout its range. And I was very pleased to see that, and again I was very surprised. I really hadn't expected it. Most vintage lenses do have harsh spots occasionally at certain points, even the fancy expensive ones. So this has beat the fancy expensive ones in that regard, and that's kind of nice. It just goes to show you what a humble lens like this can do. I love longer lenses for candid portraits, and this lens is perfect for making them. Portraits are almost always better if they're natural, and this one has the reach and the optical quality to deliver. It's a great little lens and a great buy for just £10. Okay, the next one I've got for you is the Minolta MD 50mm f2, and this is a very surprising lens indeed. This is one of the nicest 50mm lenses I've shot. I shot the 1.4 version a while ago and I was very impressed by that. One of the nicest 1.4s I've shot, and this one seems just as nice. I bought it on this camera for £35, so I got a great lens and a lovely little film SLR too, which I will be reviewing on the channel in the upcoming weeks sometime. Now this is a consumer lens, so there is quite a bit of plastic used in its construction. It is a little bit plasticky, but who cares? It's stood the test of time. It's come through all that time and it's still in excellent working order. The focus ring at the front turns very smoothly indeed, as does the aperture ring. It's a bit less clanky than the Miranda. So everything works nicely on this lens. It's a typical 80s SLR lens, but that special glass and coatings make it rather nicer than most. This lens does make really beautiful images. Minolta lenses are famous for colour, and this one doesn't disappoint. It makes gorgeous colours. They are rich, they are resonant, they are deep, they are just extraordinary, and they are a big part of this lens's character. It's really sharp too, even wide open. It's entirely sharp enough to shoot all day long and still get very sharp results. One of the sharpest 50s I've shot with. I don't know if it's a Pankolar beta quite, but it's very, very close, even if it's not. It gets sharper stop down, of course, as all lenses do, but really not by much. It's almost as sharp as at f2 as it is at f8. It makes some very nice sun stars at f22, and it'll give you some very nice blue flares as the light bounces off those blue coatings if you shoot into the sun. I know flares are not everybody's cup of tea, but I kind of like them. Blur is very beautiful indeed with that special Minolta sparkle, and this lens has some of the nicest blur I've seen from any 50mm lens. It just seems to, I don't know, it's got a special sparkle, and when the light gets going in point light sources behind the subject, my goodness, it does make a beautiful display. I'm really impressed with it. It's just gorgeous, and the blur is very smooth throughout most of its range. So all of this comes together, blur, sharpness, colour, to make this lens really one of the nicest 50s I've ever shot. And when you consider the price I got it for, £35 with a film SLR, so you know, you can buy one of these on an SLR, go out and shoot it digitally, try some film, just have a load of fun with a simple little consumer lens like this that will cost you very little money. A very nice lens indeed, and I think this one's a keeper. So those are only 3 of the very cheap lenses that I've bought, all of which are very high quality optics. There are many others you can buy, and I'm going to tell you about some of those now. We've got the Industar 26, for example. This is a Russian lens, or rather I think it's a Ukrainian lens. Apologies if I've got that wrong. This is the predecessor to the Industar 22. It's a Tessar lens, so it's very, very sharp inherently. It's an f2.8 50mm, and you get apertures from f2.8 to f22. It's a very simple lens, but it will make you some very, very lovely images. It's really sharp, it's got great contrast, it's got nice blur, it's got great colour, and all in all it's a very, very nice little lens that you can buy for around about £10 to £20, if that. These lenses are not sought after, they're really not, which is surprising because they give a very nice image. It might be because they're a little bit slow, I'm really not sure, but I think those who don't try this lens really are missing out. This is a very special little optic. It was made for the rangefinder cameras, the Fed rangefinder cameras of, I think, probably the late 60s, the early 70s sometime. It's not as common as the Industar 61, or indeed as the Industar 22 or the Industar 50. This one is a little bit of a, you know, slightly unknown Industar. It's very groovy looking as well. Look, it's got this beautiful silver polished aluminium barrel. Look at the polish on that aluminium and the engraved symbols and numbers here. This is a real mechanical sort of lens with you know, that real mechanical feel to it. You can see the rangefinder cam there. If you have a rangefinder camera, you can use it, an L39 rangefinder camera of any make. You can use this lens on that camera, and it also shoots wonderfully on digital cameras too. This is a 50mm lens, so it's 50mm on full frame. It's about 75mm on APS-C, and it's 100mm equivalent on micro four thirds. Cost of this lens, well, it's practically free. £10 to £20, as I say, if that, and you can often find them for less. A great little lens, don't miss it. What else we got? We got the Olympus Zuiko 50mm f1.8. This is a beautiful lens. These are very widely available. An absolutely fantastic optic. quite small, not quite a pancake, but very small, very slim. These were made for the OM series of Olympus SLR cameras, so you can use it on those, and you can also shoot it on any digital mirrorless camera. It makes beautiful images. It's very sharp, it's got fantastic blur, and it's got those wonderful, wonderful Olympus colours. They're kind of pumped up and saturated and really just to my taste. So this is a very, very nice little lens to shoot. Let's have a closer look. There's the lens. It's got the signature Olympus markings and colours. They use green and orange, and I think these lenses are really good looking. This one still has the pass sticker on it, and I was really lucky to find this for about £30. It's practically a new lens, so it just shows you that the bargains are out there. If you look, everything turns nice and smoothly. It's a fairly short focus throw on this one, actually, of about, just over a third of a turn, probably, maybe about half a turn, just under half a turn. The aperture ring moves lovely and cleanly still after all these years, and these lenses generally are mechanically very reliable, very long lasting. Olympus were and still are a top tier manufacturer, top shelf manufacturer, so very, very high quality. One of these lenses will cost you around about £40 to £50, though you can find them cheaper than that. I found this one for £30. I was lucky because I was patient and persistent. I wanted a good one and I waited until I found one, and that's really what you have to do if you want bargains in the vintage lens buying malarkey. What else can I show you in cheap lenses? Well, I can show you the Zeiss Jena Sonar 135mm f3.5, a really beautiful optic, very, very sharp in the Zeiss Jena tradition. CZJ lenses are some of my favourite vintage lenses. Reasonably short focus distance of 1 metre on this one, but you don't really need to get too close when you've got a lens as long as this one. Very, very nicely made, all metal, beautiful colour from the CZJ lenses, and very, very nice blur as well from this one. Blur is pretty much unflappable on this lens, and it really does make some very, very fine images indeed. Let's have a quick close-up. There's the CZJ lens, and you may be surprised to find that you can buy these lenses from about £30. They're not expensive lenses at all. This lens I think I bought for probably about £30. Can't remember now, I bought it really quite some time ago, but it's been a great lens. Everything works nicely still. The focus mechanism does need a little lubrication on this one. There's a rough spot, but you know, it's fine to use for now. It's perfectly usable and acceptable. I reckon this lens is an absolute bargain for £30. I think it's just extraordinary. One of the nicest vintage lenses you can buy, and a very cheap lens too. If you find one, grab one, because they really are fantastic. The Olympus 135mm f3.5 is another fantastic optic. Very, very nice little lens. Quite a small lens in the Olympus Zuiko tradition with a built-in hood. So if you're shooting into the sun, that's really, really handy. It's a fairly slow lens, but because it's long, it gives you loads of blur. There's plenty of blur from this lens. In fact, all the blur you want. It's very sharp. It will create sharp images from wide open at f3.5. You really don't need to stop it down. And it's got those beautiful Olympus Zuiko colours that I love so much. Pumped up and saturated, full of joy and enthusiasm. Because they're not sought after, you can buy one of these lenses for about £30 to £40, and I reckon that is just an incredible bargain. There are bargains still available, and there are cheap lenses still available. What we shouldn't do is pay inflated prices asked by some sellers, because that then drives the general price upwards. So don't buy inflated prices that some sellers ask. Look at auctions, buy on auctions, and that's where you'll find the actual worth of these lenses. Have patience, have persistence. You will find the bargains. I ought to know. I buy loads of vintage lenses, and I know that if I look often enough and put enough time into it, I will find those cheap bargains because they are there. People are selling lenses and the bargains are there. Well, I do hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please do tell me about your best vintage lens purchase in the comments box below. And if you liked this episode, please don't forget to subscribe, to like, and to ring that bell before you go. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zenography.